How did Adventists from the 19th to the 21st centuries understand the trumpets of Revelation? Welcome to the second dialogue in the series of the trumpets of the book of Revelation. In the first dialogue, we explored how Christians throughout history understood the series of the seven trumpets from the book of Revelation. We observed that it took time for the book of Revelation to be accepted into the canon of the Christian Bible. By the time it was generally accepted in the 5th century, Roman persecution had ceased, and Rome was no longer considered an enemy city deserving of God's punishment. Even the emperor seemed to be converting. The consequence was a spiritualization of the trumpets, which no longer represented the divine judgments upon Rome.
I'd like to give a warm greeting to the audience as well. My name is Daniel, and who you heard was Roy, my brother. And I could add that, as we saw previously in the first dialogue, in the Eastern Roman Empire, some believe that the first trumpet of the book of Revelation was a divine judgment against Rome, fulfilled by the barbarian invasions of their day. In the West, where the Holy Roman Empire had been established, the scenario changed in the second millennium. Recognizing the authoritarian and despotic nature of the Roman papacy, many students of prophecy began to see the Roman Catholic Church as the bloodthirsty harlot of the apocalypse. That interpretation became widespread among those opposing the dogmas and authoritative decrees of Rome. The more Rome persecuted Christians who clung to the Bible rather than the tyranny of the papacy, the more convinced Protestants became that the trumpets were indeed divine judgments against Rome.
Also, however, by the mid-19th century, Protestants began to lose their prophetic faith. By the 20th century, they had largely abandoned the belief that the trumpets represented God's judgments on Rome. It was also in the 19th century that the Adventist church emerged, becoming practically the sole inheritor of the Protestant prophetic faith regarding the apocalyptic trumpets. I want to ask our father, Dr. Alberto Treyer, how did the Adventist church come into being? Did the trumpets of the book of Revelation have anything to do with the faith of that church?
Yes, indeed. But before that, I want to express my gratitude to God for guiding me in the study of the distinctive truths of our Adventist faith concerning the sanctuary gospel and its apocalyptic projections. I studied theology at the University of Strasbourg, France, where I earned my doctoral degree in these subjects. I taught theology at the Adventist seminary in France and in the Americas. And I also conducted theological seminars for pastors in South Africa and China.
So, we know that followers of William Miller adopted the Protestant prophetic faith in the first part of the 19th century. Like other Protestants, they believed in the apocalyptic principle of interpreting a day as a year in dated prophecies. Seventh-day Adventists, who originated from the Millerite movement, retained that principle of interpretation and developed it further with more documentation, right? So I think it would be beneficial to briefly outline what the Millerites believed before we get into discussions of the trumpets within the Adventist movement.
The Millerites upheld the most significant Protestant prophetic beliefs concerning the trumpets of Revelation. The first 4 trumpets of war were executed by the barbarian invasions of the pagan Roman Empire, and the 5th and 6th trumpets were divine judgments seen in the Muslims' invasions against both the Eastern Roman Empire in Constantinople and the Holy Roman Empire in Western Rome. Eastern Rome was also known as the Byzantine Empire. and Western Rome was called the Holy Roman Empire because of its commitment to supporting the Pope in Rome.
So, did the interpretation of those who followed William Miller align with that of the preceding historicist Protestants?
Partially, yes. The most significant interpretation involved seeing the barbarian and Muslim invasions that represented in the first 6 trumpets. But what distinguished the Millerites from the earlier Protestants in that interpretation had to do with the prophetic dates. The Millerites assigned a prophetic value of 15 literal days to the hour in Revelation 9:15.
Before we proceed further, let's read Revelation 9:15. And the 4 angels who had been kept ready for this very hour and day and month and year were released to kill 1/3 of men. Let's take this step by step. Most Protestants interpreted the hour as a reference to the time of judgment framed in a prophetic day, a prophetic month of 30 days, and a thematic prophetic year equivalent to 360 prophetic days or 360 years in their prophetic calculation. But the Millerites also assigned a prophetic significance to the hour.
That's right. Although we'll delve into this in more detail when we study the 6th trumpet, we can briefly mention here that there were some Protestants who also attributed a prophetic value of 15 days to the hour.
So, check this out. If a day represents a year in apocalyptic prophecy, an hour in a day of 24 hours requires us to divide a year of 360 thematic days by 24. The result is 15 days, right?
The key point in the Millerite movement was therefore related to the prophetic dates. In the previous dialogue, we saw that the period designated for the hour of judgment in the 6th trumpet was 391 years. A prophetic day, a literal year, plus a prophetic month, 30 years, and a prophetic year, 360 thematic literal years. By adding 15 days, the result of the prophetic calculation is 391 years plus 15 days. But we won't go into details on the prophetic value here, as we will consider it more extensively in a future dialogue.
So this will require a very precise fulfillment marked on a special day of the year. When was that precise time period supposed to expire according to the Millerite understanding?
Josiah Leach, one of the main followers of William Miller, dated the beginning of the 5 months of the 5th trumpet in the year 1299, referencing the historian Gibbon, who placed the Battle of Bapheus on July 27 of that year. According to Pachymeres, the Byzantine historian contemporary of the event, that day marked not only the Battle of Bapheus, but also the beginning of the troubles for Eastern Rome and the start of the military expansion of the Ottoman Turks.
And since 5 months are equal to 150 days, this symbolizes 150 years designated for the hour of judgment of the 5th trumpet.
Yes, but we are here interested in understanding how the Millerites and later the Adventists interpreted that prophecy. What Josiah Leach did was to connect the 150 years of the 5th trumpet with the 391 years and 15 days of the 6th trumpet, resulting in a total of 541 years and 15 days. He did this because he believed that the entire period of Turkish expansion and harassment against Byzantium in Constantinople and Rome in Europe, from its beginning to its end, should be taken into account. Thus, starting on July 27, 1299, it reached August 11, 1840, exactly 541 years and 15 days.
So what precisely did Lich predict was going to happen on that date? Did he write about its fulfillment before or after the period had elapsed?
2 years before the expiration of the date, Josiah Lich predicted that something significant regarding the Ottoman Empire would occur. Many even expected the fall of the Ottoman Empire on that day. When the appointed date arrived, newspapers reported the news of the Turkish Sultan's submission to the higher powers of Europe on that very day. The impressive fulfillment of this prophecy on the exact day anticipated by Lich 2 years earlier strengthened the Millerite message proclaiming the Lord's coming in 1843 and later with a better calculation on October 22, 1844.
We can read in the book of The Great Controversy of Ellen G. White how she recounts this extraordinary fulfillment of the dated prophecy of the fifth and sixth trumpets combined that were strengthened through the faith of the Millerites in their belief that Christ would come at the end of the 2,300 symbolic days of Daniel chapter 8, verse 14, representing literal years. She herself participated in this experience in her youth, right?
Yeah.
No doubt the book, The Great Controversy, is essential for Seventh-day Adventists. Ellen White explains that Miller's mistake was in believing that the cleansing of the sanctuary in Daniel 8:14 had to do with the purification of the earth by fire in the second coming of Christ, according to the New Testament. However, the sanctuary to be cleansed was not earth, as we now know, but the heavenly sanctuary from all the sins committed by God's people recorded there. The Apostle Paul affirmed this when he wrote the following in the Epistle to the Hebrews, and we'll read that. Therefore, it was necessary that the copies of the things in the heavens, meaning the earthly temple, should be purified with these, but the heavenly things themselves, meaning the heavenly temple, with better sacrifices than these. Hebrews 9:23.
We can also see that they themselves saw the connection between Daniel 8:14 and Revelation 11, verses 15 through 19, which describe the judgment period of the seventh trumpet. That trumpet describes the opening of the most holy place in the heavenly temple, mirroring what happened at the end of the year when the high priest purified the temple of God in ancient Israel. Let's read. The seventh angel sounded, and the nations were angry, and your wrath has come, and the time of the dead, that they should be judged, and that you should reward your servants, the prophets and the saints, and those who fear your name, small and great, and should destroy those who destroy the earth. Then the temple of God was opened in heaven, and the ark of his covenant was seen in his temple. Revelation 11, verses 15 through 19.
Very well. They also understood that the disappointment of not seeing Jesus coming in the clouds on October 22, 1844, was anticipated in Revelation 10, linked to the beginning of the seventh trumpet, which announced the hour of judgment on that day in the heavenly temple. Let's read Revelation 10:7. What the angels standing with one foot on the sea and one foot on the land said to John, but in the days of the sounding of the seventh angel, when he is about to sound, the mystery of God would be finished, as he declared to his servants, the prophets.
And this is a reference to the prophecies of the prophet Daniel, as the same angel told Daniel to seal the prophecies concerning the time of the end, until the time of their fulfillment, when they would be fully understood. And more than once, the angel tells Daniel to seal his book until the day of its fulfillment in the time of the end. We read in Daniel chapter 12, verses 4 and 9. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. Go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end.
And that's what the angel also says regarding the 2300 days in Daniel 8:14 concerning the time of the end. Let's read that. He said to me, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. And it happened when I, Daniel, had seen the vision and was seeking the meaning, the angel Gabriel came and told him, understand, son of man, that the vision refers to the time of the end. That is for the time of the end. And you keep the vision, for it refers to many days. Daniel 8:14, 17, 19, and 26. So in other words, for many years, for 2,300 years.
When one considers the links of all these prophecies from Daniel and Revelation in the context of the sanctuary gospel, it is fascinating to see the clarity of the divine revelation. Seventh-day Adventists spend entire nights studying these topics. Often Ellen G. White, to whom God granted the gift of prophecy, received a vision and confirmed these studies. Thus, the foundation of the Adventist faith was laid through the study of the prophetic word and the confirmation of the gift of prophecy. They understood that the date of the 2,300 years had been correctly interpreted, but the expected event was wrong because they had not taken into account that the purification of the sanctuary was related to the heavenly sanctuary and not by fire, but by the blood of Christ, as Hebrews 9:12 says.
Regarding the seventh trumpet, we see that it is connected to the purification of that heavenly temple, because when the door opened to the most holy place, it was to purify the sanctuary in the symbolic temple of Israel. And in the seventh trumpet, the opening of the door in the heavenly temple reveals the Ark of the Covenant, as we already saw, which was in the most holy place.
That reveals coherence in John's revelation, because when you get to the sixth trumpet, the voice from heaven comes from the four horns of the golden altar, which is in the holy place, in the symbolic temple of ancient Israel. But let's go back to the previous six trumpets. What conclusion did Adventists reach after they got through the disappointment of 1844?
In 1848, as a result of the Adventist or sabbatical Bible conferences, the emerging end-time Adventist movement also affirmed that the Protestant perspective of the first four trumpets in Revelation was correct. God punished the ancient pagan Roman Empire through the four most significant barbarian invasions that led to the collapse of that empire in the West. They also adhered to the Millerite interpretation for the dates given concerning the fifth and sixth trumpets, framed in the two most significant Muslim invasions. Since then, both biblical predictions were considered fulfilled.
The Adventist awakening, later organized into a church in 1863, as we know, did Adventists then officially affirm that interpretation of the trumpets from that date on?
Yes. In 1883, The trumpets of Revelation were studied again at a session of the General Conference of Adventist Churches in the context of a futuristic proposal by a certain R.S. Owen. A committee of 10 people was appointed. In the 12th and 13th meetings on November 19, it was reported to the Assembly that the committee saw no reason to change the view that had been held previously, especially considering that, in the committee's judgment, the proposal was not biblical and would destabilize some of the most important foundational points of our faith.
So there was a general conference that confirmed the Adventist interpretation of the trumpets received from Protestantism, including the prophetic dates set by the Millerites.
The Adventist Church never denied officially the prophetic days of Daniel and Revelation, including those of the fifth and sixth trumpets. Miller's error had to do with the anticipated event for the 2,300 prophetic days or literal years, but not the calculation of the dates themselves.
I think we should highlight that it's noteworthy that the pioneers concluded that by accepting Owen's non-biblical futurism, some of the most important foundational points of the Adventist faith would be destabilized. Currently, we're seeing a lot of those in our church who are tempted to project the trumpets of Revelation into the future as well. But the adoption of futurism implies the denial of the existence of our church as a movement raised by God with a prophetic mission in mind to spread throughout the world before the Lord's second coming, right?
Well said. The denial of the prophetic days of Daniel and Revelation, including those of the fifth and sixth trumpets, disrupts the prophetic foundation that God has left us, since our movement began with an understanding of those prophetic days leading to the Adventist movement. In the following Congress of 1884, some wanted to insist on Owen's futuristic proposal, claiming that no decision had been made on the matter. Therefore, in that General Conference meeting, the decision taken the previous year was reiterated, affirming that the committee's decision had been brought to the full conference and it had been approved.
So the interpretation that sees the fulfillment of the sixth trumpet on August 11th, 1840, was declared foundational for the prophetic faith of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. What did Ellen White say about that decision?
Ellen G. White was informed about this resolution, and she confirmed it in her book, The Great Controversy, which was published a little later in 1888. On June 15, 1884, she wrote a letter to Uriah Schmidt and his wife, and another to Uriah Schmidt on the 27th of the same month regarding that decision to reject Owen's interpretation. In that letter, she also warned about a certain W. L. Raymond who claimed to have new light as Owen had claimed. This is what she wrote in 1884.
Brother W. L. Raymond was going to go right away from the camp. He said we were clubbing him. I told him that when my brethren, as did Brother Owen, came up with new light, he almost made me have an ague chill, for I knew it was a device of Satan which no one could understand, although a man declare it unto them.
Brother Raymond has done a work that was tearing down new views after the order of the views Brother Owen presented to the council for examination. The same was done with Brother Raymond's views.
This is what Ellen G. White writes.
Yes. A council heard his arguments and then wrote out their answer. He has consented to abide by the decision of his brethren.
In the year 1840, another remarkable fulfillment of prophecy excited widespread interest. At the very time specified, Turkey, through her ambassadors, accepted the protection of the Allied powers of Europe and thus placed herself under the control of Christian nations. The event exactly fulfilled the prediction. Great Controversy, page 334 to 335.
Were there also other sessions of the General Conference where the same interpretation regarding the trumpets of the Book of Revelation was confirmed?
After the confirmation of the spirit of prophecy to the decision of the 1883 Congress, several sessions of the General Conference placed a definite emphasis on the fulfillment of the fifth and sixth trumpets. This could be seen in 1901, 1903, and 1905, the days of the years 1833 concerning the meteor shower announced by Jesus and repeated in the book of Revelation, August 11, 1840, the Turkish submission to the high powers of Europe, and October 22, 1844, the foretold disappointment in Revelation 10 and the beginning of the seventh trumpet with the ministry of Jesus in the most holy place were considered at such General Conference meetings as milestones in Adventist history.
So is it safe to say that the understanding of the anticipated disappointment prophetically stated in Revelation 10 was repeatedly maintained in connection with the announcement of the seventh trumpet?
That was the general accepted focus among Adventists in the 19th and early 20th centuries. They placed the coming of the angel between 1840 and 1844. As a matter of fact, the angel of Revelation 10 announces the disappointment of 1844 in connection with the seventh trumpet, with the door of the heavenly temple being opened to the most holy place, while during the sixth trumpet the voice comes from the holy place. We have already read the passages confirming this in chapters 9 to 11 of the book of Revelation. S.N. Haskell summarized this standard approach in the early 20th century with the following words: the little period between 1840 and 1844, during which the message of Revelation 10, 1 to 11 was delivered, was the time between the close of the sixth trumpet and the sounding of the seventh. We find the book of Haskell, the story of the seer of Patmos, which was published in 1905. Ellen G. White also kept that faith in the midst of the Battle Creek apostasy in April 1903. She wrote, you could read, Roy.
Yes. Nothing is to be allowed to come in that will disturb the foundation of the faith upon which we have been building ever since the message came in 1842, 1843, and 1844. I was in this message, and ever since I have been standing before the world, true to the light that God has given us. We do not propose to take our feet off the platform on which they were placed, as day by day we sought the Lord with earnest prayer, seeking for light.
And in the book, The Great Controversy, page 433, she wrote, "The announcement that the temple of God was opened in heaven and the ark of his testament was seen points to the opening of the most holy place of the heavenly sanctuary in 1844, as Christ entered there to perform the closing work of the atonement. Those who by faith followed their great high priest as he entered upon his ministry in the most holy place beheld the ark of his testament. As they had studied the subject of the sanctuary, they had come to understand the Savior's change of ministration, and they saw that he was now officiating before the ark of God, pleading his blood in behalf of sinners."
At this point, it will be useful to include two statements. among many others which are similar. Two statements of Ellen G. White regarding pins and pillars that are not to be changed. The following statement from her pen was placed under the headline, "Protest against removing landmarks."
When men come in who would move one pin or pillar from the foundation which God has established by his Holy Spirit, let the aged men who were pioneers in our work speak plainly, and let those who are dead speak also, by the reprinting of their articles in our periodicals. Gather up the rays of divine light that God has given as he has led his people on step by step in the way of truth. This truth will stand the test of time and trial.
And later in a letter to Elder S.M. Cobb, December 25, 1906, he wrote, "Not a pin is to be moved from the foundations of our faith. Truth is still truth. Those who become uncertain will drift into erroneous theories and will finally find themselves infidel in regard to the past evidence we have had of what is truth. The old waymarks must be preserved that we lose not our bearings." So was the interpretation of the trumpets in the Adventist Church always unanimous during the 20th century?
No. Although the official interpretation was maintained, there were certain objections that arose when Ellen G. White requested a review of the 1888 edition of the book The Great Controversy, especially in relation to refinements in wording and grammar. In her words, "When I learned that the Great Controversy must be reset, I determined that we would have everything closely examined to see if the truths it contained were stated in the very best manner to convince those not of our faith that the Lord had guided and sustained me in the writing of its pages."
I think that some went beyond the request and sought historical confirmation in certain statements she had written, which they did not find, and that's where the problem began.
Arthur White, her grandson and the author of the 6 extensive volumes of the history of Ellen G. White, provided the following report on that review.
About half of his suggestions might be classified as minor, such as having to do with a precision of wording or calling for a supporting reference. The other half were more significant, some challenging prophetic dates, such as the dating of the 1,260 years and calling into question the autumn termination of the 2,300-day prophecy. His suggestions, which called for a change in teachings in the book, were not accepted, such as the relation of Revelation 9 to Josiah Litch's prediction of August 11, 1840, and Revelation 11 having to do with the 2 witnesses in the French Revolution. These were carefully reviewed for soundness of position and buttressed with reliable documentation, as we see documented by Arthur L. White with the Prescott letter to W.C. White, April 6, 1915.
There is also another letter written by William White, son of Ellen G. White, which his mother signed, where it states that neither his mother nor the pioneers ever believed in a verbal inspiration of the biblical authors. It asserts that her writings should not be used as authority in historical matters.
Some have interpreted that letter as granting freedom to disregard the historical information she provided in fulfillment of biblical prophecies. However, the fact that she rejected questioning of prophetic days because those who reviewed the book, The Great Controversy, did not have all the historical information they needed, demonstrates that they misinterpret that statement.
I think also that it will be convenient to read the main part of that letter, which I read in the documents that my dad has and which are available on the internet. When controversy was written, Mother never thought that the readers would take it as an authority on historical dates and use it to settle controversies. I cannot see consistency in our putting forth a claim of verbal inspiration when Mother does not make any such claim. And I certainly think we will make a great mistake if we lay aside historical research and endeavor to settle historical questions by the use of Mother's books as an authority when she herself does not wish them to be used in any such way.
Given that Ellen G. White signed her son's letter, approving of what he wrote, Haskell misunderstood the letter due to his belief in verbal inspiration. He argued that William White's mother was old at that time and didn't know what she had signed. Prescott, who reviewed the book, took the opposite extreme and for the rest of his life became liberal in his interpretation. He rejected most of the prophetic dates and opposed the apocalyptic interpretation of the number 666 in Revelation 13:18 as corresponding to the title Vicarious Filii Dei.
And both tendencies are still being represented in our church today, apparently misinterpreting what William White wrote. Some try to present Ellen White to unbelievers as an authority on history, while others play the role of unbelievers, openly stating that we can't take her writings about history seriously. So how can we reconcile this? Is it a contradiction? Because she rejected Prescott's suggestion to remove the prophetic dates she had included in her book.
No, it's not a contradiction. God revealed to Ellen G. White the main events in the history of the great conflict between Christ and Satan, and she had to place them in the time they occurred by searching historical books. In some cases, she may have cited some points from those authors that can be debated, but regarding prophetic dates, she received direct confirmation from heaven. What William wrote was that serious historical information should be sought to support what she wrote.
Did Ellen G. White give any other reason for rejecting suggestions to change the dates in the second edition of her book?
Yes, she wrote 2 letters to W. Prescott, warning him about what he was doing, as well as another letter to A.G. Daniels, who was then the president of the General Conference. Let's read.
At times, Elder Prescott, you have come very near making shipwreck of your faith. Only the grace of God and the confidence you have had in the messages He has sent through the spirit of prophecy have held you back. I was shown that you are still in danger of making grave mistakes. You have many times escaped from the snare of the enemy, but you are not beyond the danger of making mistakes. I write this to caution you.
To A.G. Daniels, the president of the General Conference, she wrote this.
Message after message has come to me from the Lord concerning the dangers surrounding you and Elder Prescott. I have seen that Satan would have been greatly pleased to see Elders Prescott and Daniels undertake the work of a general overhauling of our books. But neither of you is called of God to do that work. The enemy of truth, through the ministry of fallen angels, would be pleased to introduce uncertainty in the minds of many in regard to the doctrines that have been established by the sanction of the Holy Spirit. Disguised as one who has a deep understanding of truth, Satan will seek to point out supposed errors in that which needs no revision, and it will take much time and patient labor to restore confidence in those whose minds are unsettled by unnecessary changes. God forbids His servants to alter that which needs no change. This is from Letter 70 in 1910. Did those 2 pastors follow her advice?
She advised sending them out for evangelism to be doing something useful instead of submitting false prophetic ideas. Daniel succeeded and accepted her rebukes, but Prescott felt humiliated by that recommendation, and for the rest of his life he questioned the prophetic days of Daniel and Revelation.
So now that we have a lot of technological advances in terms of historical studies, is there enough evidence to support these apocalyptic dates from a historical perspective?
Yes, William White wrote quite a bit after his mother's death. Listen to the following. I am truly sorry that anyone should say that Elder Prescott teaches heresy. I think there are some things which he teaches regarding the prophetic days that many of our other ministers and teachers do not accept. I and many others that I highly regard question very seriously that part of his teaching which seems to unsettle a few of the historical days that our ministers have used heretofore in their expositions of prophecy.
Nonetheless, they saw the need to study history more thoroughly to better substantiate the prophetic dates.
That's right. William White had already written on May 7, 1915, I am hoping and expecting that a further study of history will develop confidence in the work which God has done through revelation given to his mother, and in correcting those extravagant and fanatical views regarding her work which are injurious to Christian experience and to the advancement of the truth.
Can it be said today that the hope and expectation of additional studies to prove the statements of Ellen G. White and the pioneers have been fulfilled?
Certainly. Although the prophetic days had been documented by the Protestants and Millerites who preceded us, it was necessary to expand that documentation with even more defined information. Our church felt the need to solidify our prophetic faith, and significant light came from Leroy Froom, who spent 15 years researching in Europe and the United States what those who came before us believed. He made 3 trips to Europe and received recognition from many authorities in history for the tremendous work he published, a 4th-volume set titled The Prophetic Faith of Our Fathers. The material he gathered, from which he extracted the essential for that work, is available in the James White Library at Andrews University. This would show the church that we are not alone in our prophetic vision. Regarding the 1260 and 1290 years of Daniel's prophecy, it could be seen over time that the foundation laid by Uriah Smith, largely taken from historicist Protestantism, was solid. Later, D.A. Augsburger and C.N. Maxwell, they came, bringing a larger wealth of historical information on the subject. Recently, the doctoral thesis of Dr. Giancarlo Zukoski from Brazil, titled The Role and Status of the Catholic Church in the Church-State Relationship within the Roman Empire from 306 to 1814, is a mine of historical information. He defended his thesis at Andrews University in July 2009.
A couple of years ago, when I helped you draft the English version of some of your books and translated the text from Spanish to English, I could see that you had also gathered a lot more historical information than you had before.
Thank you, Daniel, for your help in English writing, as well as to Dave Sidnor, who has been helping me with an edition in a language not native to me. I provide much additional historical information in my book, The Seals and the Trumpets and the Apocalyptic Times of the Sanctuary. Also, Heinz Scheidinger in Austria, one of my brightest students years ago at the Adventist Seminary in Cologne, France, wrote a little book published by the General Conference Biblical Research Institute, documenting the prophetic days of papal supremacy. Today, such prophetic dates are an indisputed truth that not even Prescott could disregard if we were alive. And regarding the prophecy of the 2,300 years, according to apocalyptic symbolism, today we can confirm the dates of its fulfillment even through astronomy. We don't have time to consider this, but I analyzed it in detail in my book, The Apocalyptic Times of the Sanctuary, available on Amazon.
So was the official interpretation of the trumpets that enjoyed so much acceptance during the 19th century ever rejected in our church?
The official view of the prophetic dates of the fifth and sixth trumpets was questioned in 1914 by W. W. Prescott, former president of the General Conference, and W. A. Spicer, General Conference secretary, and again at the Bible Conference on July 17, 1919, after Ellen G. White had passed away. William White, her son, was not invited to that 1919 conference, but Prescott was there. The inspiration of Ellen G. White and the historical fulfillment of the fifth and sixth trumpets were called into question. However, no resolution rejecting the official interpretation of our church was made. The questions were left hanging, with several of them unanswered to everyone's satisfaction. In June and July 1944, a ministry magazine published an article by Grace Amadon aiming to prove the historical accuracy of the trumpet dates, especially the one dealing with the Battle of Baphomet. It was published under immediate release. Reading today what Amadon wrote, one can see that she did the best she could at that time. But she also did not believe in the way our church had interpreted the fulfillment of the trumpets. She wrote an unpublished paper proposing a new interpretation of the trumpets, accepting 2 or 3 of the first 4 trumpets, but it did not attract followers. In 1941, H.M.S. Richards, famous for his radio program, emphasized in his message to the General Conference session that we are living in the last part of the 7 churches, the 7 seals, and the 7 trumpets. That was the last time the trumpets were mentioned in a General Conference session.
In other words, the official position of the Seventh-day Adventist Church remains the one we inherited from Protestantism, the Millerites, and our pioneers. So no General Conference session has changed the interpretation confirmed by the 19th century sessions.
Not only that, but the trumpets have always been interpreted this way in our church until today, although we have to acknowledge that today several theologians have taken a more liberal stance following Prescott.
Why? Why are some in our church not seeing the fulfillment of the trumpets as those who left us their prophetic legacy saw them in preceding centuries?
The basic problem until recent times had to do with the prophetic dates of the fifth and sixth trumpets. Everyone had the problem that the works of Pachymeres, the Byzantine author who wrote about the Battle of Bapheus, from which the Millerite interpretation derived, were in medieval Greek, and his works were never translated into English except for some fragments or another modern language. So they had to rely on isolated translations of sections they thought might shed light. My ability to work on the topic today stems from the fact that I earned my doctorate in France and taught at our French seminary. And the 4 large volumes of Pachymeres were translated into that language around 25 or 30 years ago. But I don't know how many would have been willing to invest around $500 at a special price to buy them, as I did if they had had that translation in English. Moreover, most of the historical documents of other historians from the 13th and 14th centuries were translated in part or in full into French 2 or 3 centuries ago. But even then, it would not have been easy for us to find them because the internet did not exist. Today, if not everything, almost everything can be obtained at home without leaving one's chair, thanks to brother Google. So I obtained all the information needed to clarify the issue, and my paper was published by a scientific journal, as you can see in the following slide. I will deal with this documentation in a future dialogue.
Besides the lack of historical documentation that many have to confirm their fulfillment, are there other comprehension problems regarding the prophecies of the trumpets?
Yes, it has to do with the introduction of new methods of interpretation. Several theologians thought they could solve the difficulties with exegesis without paying much attention to historical facts, and they are falling more or less into the idealistic interpretation that spiritualizes the prophetic descriptions of Daniel and John. Others are adopting the structuralist method that began in the theological world about half a century ago, to arrange the literary structure of the book of Revelation in a way that fit their own ideas, and that is leading them to partly abandon the real purpose of the trumpets.
And that purpose, as we saw when we considered the history of interpretation, has to do with the punishment that was to fall on Rome, that last empire in Daniel's chapter 2 statue, right? And other prophecies, not other people's.
Agreed. But we will consider that in other dialogues, we will consider it in other dialogues when studying what the Bible and especially the book of Revelation say on this subject. I won't introduce that aspect here.
Well, since you will bring more information about the historical fulfillment of those prophetic dates in one of our future dialogues, what I have left to ask now then is, in our study of the history of interpretation of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, is whether modern interpreters of our church are offering any other interpretation. I'm thinking of a supposed new light, as Ellen G. White labeled proposals that departed from what was believed about the trumpets until then, and that she also rejected in the 19th century.
In other words, we try to get at, when did some cracks start to appear in the prophetic heritage we received from Protestants regarding the trumpets?
Prescott's proposals to abandon the interpretation of the 5th and 6th trumpets were never accepted in our church. But Edwin Thiel wrote a commentary on the book of Revelation for his theology classes, and in it he changed the interpretation of the first trumpet. He wanted to see the destruction of Jerusalem in it. That forced him to spiritualize the third and fourth trumpets in a way similar to what was done in the Middle Ages. But he resumed our prophetic heritage in the fifth and sixth trumpets. Maxwell did the same shortly after in his commentary on the book of Revelation, known by its title, God's Scare. In an attempt to resolve the difficulties of understanding, the Biblical Research Institute of the General Conference organized a committee in the 1980s to study more deeply the prophecies of Revelation. I attended two of those meetings, one at Newell College, England, and another at one of the General Conference offices in Washington, D.C. John Paulien introduced a new interpretation there that was rejected. But as they later wrote in a report, since they did not have an interpretation that satisfied all the biblical and historical requirements of the first half of Revelation up to that point, they concluded that they did not want to hinder research, trusting that there would be more light in the future.
What was rejected from John Paulien's proposal?
What was rejected from John Paulien was his spiritualization of the trumpets, as well as his introduction of philosophies that emerged in the 19th and 20th centuries as a result of the French Revolution. In Paulien's document, based on his doctoral thesis and presented to the committee, he wrote the following: I believe the trumpets are to be interpreted as symbols of spiritual realities. The historical events for which we are looking are not as likely to deal with politics and nations and ethnic groups as with ideas and philosophies and great transnational movements throughout the New Testament era. So this is what he tried to do in order to reach a conclusion about something that evidently he couldn't confirm in history. The fifth and sixth trumpets may parallel, according to Paulien, Daniel 8:11:40 to 45, as being fulfilled in the time of the end. Thus, for Paulien, the sixth trumpet would be a union of secular capitalism, communism, Islam, and the third world with all forms of Christianity. In this way, he breaks the historical sequence of apocalyptic prophecies, returning to the Islamism in the sixth trumpet that originated in the 7th century and projecting philosophies that emerged in the time of the end back to the fifth trumpet. He completely disregards the fact that the sixth trumpet ends before 1844, when the door opens to the most holy place in the heavenly temple. This is a bold and blatant blow to the experience of the early Adventist movement. I recall that Dr. Gerard Hassel told me in one of those meetings at the Biblical Research Institute regarding the new light Paulien wanted to introduce, that the trumpets are armies, not philosophies. Ranko Stefanovic replaced his teacher Paulien in teaching the book of Revelation at Andrews University and adopted Paulien's interpretation, which, in general terms, was followed or tolerated by Gerald Pandel and Eckhard Miller at the Biblical Research Institute of the General Conference. Surprisingly, in the New Andres Bible Commentary, edited by Dr. Angel Manuel Rodriguez, our prophetic heritage of the fifth and sixth trumpets is completely ignored, and Paulian spiritualized approach is adopted. They argue that while the description projects armies, the fact that they cause distress shows that their dimension is spiritual. But does the distress caused by the armies from the east that invaded Israel as locusts make us believe that they were not real armies, but philosophies?
Wow, I find that so difficult to understand how they could really believe that. Or do they simply trivialize the interpretation of the trumpets?
They clearly spiritualize it and the content. By seeing the trumpets as symbols of spiritual realities, Pauline is adopting the spiritualized method from the Middle Ages that Protestantism had to overcome. Where can we see God's judgments against Rome in those interpretations? Like in the Middle Ages, the prophetic projections of Revelation become more and more vague and ambiguous. Rome can easily camouflage itself again so that its throne is not perceived as the dragon's throne on earth, as described clearly by John in Revelation 13:2-3.
They admit to having serious problems themselves. Eckhard Miller wrote an article in German, Die Sieben Posaune, where he generally adopts Pauline and Stefanovic's approaches to the trumpets, admitting that his is a proposal that is not necessarily the truth. You can see my critical analysis of his approach on my website. Ranko Stefanovic, for his part, leaves us in uncertainty when concluding his analysis of the fifth trumpet, saying, "It is uncertain whether John intended that every detail of this description be interpreted. The damage caused by the locusts, or Revelation 9, is obviously not military, but more ideological. Destructive philosophies caused tremendous damage to the Christian faith and behavior."
Seriously? Does that mean that then God sends the fifth trumpet to harm the Christian faith? Is that the kind of judgment God intends? By denying a military description in the fifth trumpet and saying that it is instead an ideology, he seems to be adopting the idealist method that is uninterested in concrete historical facts. Is that the new light they want us to believe? Isn't that throwing away the theological, historical, and prophetic heritage we received?
And before you answer that, what do they do with the prophetic dates of these two trumpets, the fifth and the sixth trumpet? Do they abandon historicism, which attributes the fulfillment of a day for a year in prophetic dates? Can an interpretation that disregards the prophetic dates of Daniel and Revelation be considered historicist?
Many believe today that all these new interpretations, as well as the one we inherited from Protestantism and our pioneers, are historicists. But that is a mistake. When Ranko Stefanovic was asked in Norway if his approach was historicist, he replied, "Yes, 100% historicist." A pastor told me that. That is not true. The basic principle that sustains historicism is to respect the calculation of a year for each day in apocalyptic prophecies. And these authors disregard it in their interpretation of the trumpets to the point that they project the fifth and sixth trumpets into the time of the end without considering the connection of the sixth trumpet with the holy place of the heavenly temple.
So, in conclusion, to summarize some of what we've said, neither idealists who spiritualize the book of Revelation nor futurists can offer a clear projection of the specified prophetic dates in the fifth and sixth trumpets. And thus, whatever they come up with distorts the historicist legacy we received from Protestantism and our pioneers, confirmed by the spirit of prophecy.
They fail to realize that what they are doing with their new ideas is destroying the foundational experience of our pioneers, which was confirmed by the spirit of prophecy. This has disastrous implications for the mission God gave us, because they despise an experience that is linked to the truth of the gospel related to the heavenly sanctuary.
Well, I think we have come to a point where we can finish for today and leave some more room for the future dialogues we will be having. So, for the next dialogue onward, we will begin to analyze the biblical approach to the trumpets of Revelation and show how these interpreters deviate from what Christ revealed to John in this final book of the Bible. We will also see how these prophecies were fulfilled in history. These were facts. Let's have faith. God leads His church, and His church will prevail. For as the Apostle Paul said, we can do nothing against the truth, but for the truth. 1 Corinthians 13.